History. History always is, at best, like this story, a chiaroscuro. The 23 Club by Edward Flaherty. Episode 1. Desertification. T.E. Lawrence was once asked, "What is it, Major Lawrence, that attracts you to the desert?" "It is clean," he answered. "I like it because it is clean." Part 1. Prologue. In late fall 2009 via Skype, Toons van der Walt, speaking from the United Arab Emirates, pushed, "Look, Chalmers, I've got a world-class destination resort in the empty quarter, and I'm in trouble. It's going bad. I need you down here. You're one of the best. You've got to fix this for me. You've got to come down here." Erik Chalmers, speaking from Switzerland, replied, "Listen to me, Toons. I'm out of the game. I'm retired. I've had enough of these last-minute mashups. And this project, it just has too much noise." Toons van der Walt, with aggravation, pleaded, "What do you need, Chalmers? Money? Autonomy? Just tell me. I'll arrange it for you." Part 2. Berner Alps. Madge looked content as the bright red funicular climbed slowly and steadily up a steep slope in the heart of Switzerland. Riding in that funicular, Madge would, in the next 12 minutes, rise over 1,000 meters into the Berner Alps. Her view early in May, exhilarating, heart-pounding. On her way home from grocery shopping, Madge sat comfortably on well-fitted, well-upholstered seats. She appreciated the details, noticed them, without effort. The funicular functioned with fundamental, actually exceptional convenience. The design details breathed with the landscape. Looking out UV-protected, polarized glass windows, she had a rapturous panoramic view, more than she could ever absorb. Sitting beside her on the seat were 2 shopping bags. In one bag, stuffed on top of a couple kilos of new potatoes, she had a bunch of the season's first crop of local chard, its white stems and huge green leaves boisterously pushing out. Her second shopping bag, filled with odds and ends, also had fresh green leaves spilling over its top, the smaller, strappish leaves of just-picked bärlauch. She enjoyed these market trips, and especially the fresh local produce. Looking out the funicular window, she absorbed herself in the landscape changes. During her 12-minute ride, she could see the season change from a mature floriferous spring down in the valley market to the remnants of winter, with just the earliest hints of spring up at her home. While doing her shopping in the valley, she had reveled in the glory of these longer spring days. The plants absolutely sang in the warmer sunshine, the moist soil. The crocus had already passed. The forsythia were just about by. The daffodils and early tulips were in bloom. Saucer magnolia buds had just started to reveal their satiny promise. Spring could not be constrained. Bleached horse chestnut trees, their leaf buds protruding, thick, rigid, straining to burst, expressing droplets of spring moisture. And apple trees, young leaves still tender, their light-hearted pink and white flower buds just beginning to dance. And deciduous forests on the south-facing slopes at the edge of town, their trees, their just-emerged leaves, exuding a palpable energy, shimmering with translucent chartreuse. If there ever was an elixir of life, it could be imbibed from that strangely intoxicating aroma of newly mown spring grass. And today, in each small front yard, the residents had been cutting that spring grass, yielding that elixir that slows down and seemingly stops time, that elixir that enters by the nose and captivates head, heart, and mind. And Madge, she inhaled deeply and with satisfaction. When she looked closely at the cut lawns, she discovered small natural bouquets of delicate violets, dainty white daisy clusters, and patches of baby primroses, creamy white, buttery yellow, all these wild little mixed clumpings popping up everywhere. And the people who cut their lawns, they appreciated these wildflowers too, cutting carefully around them, leaving them to their life of natural beauty. At the edge of the village, she could see the cows, already in their spring pastures. The cows were well taken care of through all stages of their lives. Their mountain synergy with humans had a practical balance. As the cows nibbled the fresh green, even ebullient pastures, the happy sounds of their bells gave Madge a healthy joy. Through the funicular window, she saw a panorama of sharp mountain peaks, snow-covered, gray granite, a jagged 4,000 meters high. The powerful mid-afternoon spring sun warmed their cold granite faces. The sun's brightness energized them, their sweeping surfaces of drifted snow twinkling with pinpoint reflections, their massive glacier noses throbbing with electrical blue-white refracted translucencies, breathtaking, absolutely breathtaking, the entire landscape. There was still more. Behind and above the mountains, on a background of deep, dazzling, clear blue sky, were scattered but heavy, full cumulonimbus clouds, every shade from charcoal gray to blinding white, puffy, swelling with moisture. In front of the granite peaks and lower in the middle ground were row after row of mountain ridges, some already in shade, saw-tooth silhouetted by their covering of black coniferous forests. Amongst those black sawtooths, and between those ridges and the great granite peaks, hanging halfway up their slopes, hovered, in endlessly evolving transitions, appearing and disappearing, horizontal threads of gray mist, and thin horizontal bands of very low, dark gray stratocumulus clouds clinging to vertical faces, clinging to ridge lines. Standing out, here and there in the upper middle ground, were sheer granite cliffs. Over these cliffs, off the higher mid-mountain plateaus, waterfalls streamed, falling hundreds of meters, and each one, in this afternoon sun, like a stream of diamonds, sparkled ever so brightly. Such an unimaginable wealth of water, plants, fertile soil, landscape richness beyond words, stupendous in spring, breathtaking every day of the year. But now, today, Madge's personal thoughts consumed her. Part 3. Madge. After decades of living and working, often on the edges of nowhere, in places sparse with life, meager with resources, after decades trailing her husband all around North Africa and the Middle East, Madge was happy to have finally retired to this quiet, beautiful mountain region. Madge and Erik now lived with all modern conveniences, a civilized mountain lifestyle, dependable water, sanitary, power, and connectivity, both in digital communications and also in transportation, and walkable, with an especially stunning landscape viewed from a distance or with a magnifying glass. Life flourished everywhere. Why did her husband have to even think about another pressurized assignment in the uncertainty, the barrenness, the intense heat, and the awkward humidity of the Arabian Peninsula? There's no way I'm going, she thought. In fact, there's no way he is going. Enough is enough. Getting out of the funicular, she went to the adjacent bike shelter. She arranged her shopping into the 2 panniers on her bike and began the level 3-kilometer ride home. Riding the hardened path through the forest, she could hear the bird song. Crossing small creeks, she could hear bubbling, tinkling, rushing sounds of the seasonal snowmelt. The temperature was around 5 degrees centigrade, and riding the bike built just enough body heat for a balanced, exhilarating feeling. Filling her lungs with this mountain air, each breath was rejuvenation. But inside, she still worried. Why does he have to go again? We worked hard. We undertook a lot of austerities for this retirement. These mountains have been our inspiration, our recovery destination for decades. Now we live here, and their healing magic is as strong as ever. Her heart started to ache with the thoughts. She would have to let this all out with him. He had come from a family of high blood pressure, and even though he was physically active in his work, the tensions of his work undermined his health. It was year after year in the tropical sun, outside in more than 50 degrees centigrade. His skin showed all the symptoms of cancer, ready to bloom. The thoughts alone nearly overwhelmed her. In the last year he had lost much of his excess weight walking the mountains, and his skin was finally starting to lighten to get back to normal. Just let it be, she thought. No need to go back down there again. As she reached a narrow gravel path on the right, winding uphill to her home, she got off her bike and walked it the last 100 meters. Their cottage was at 1,500 meters above sea level and facing northeast, still way too early for the vernal alpine flowers. She looked at the promise of crocus and snowbells poking their green heads through the melting snow. She also saw the smallest shoots of spring green grass just starting to work their way through last year's dormant clumps of tufted, cold-shocked yellow-brown grass. She parked her bike under the overhang of their cottage, gathered up her shopping bags, and just before she went inside, took a deep breath. Inside, she put her groceries on the kitchen sink and called to Erik. Part 4. The Cottage. Warm and welcoming, Erik and Madge's cottage was sturdy and protective. It was in traditional local alpine style, built of spruce, with a solid concrete basement storage, an airy attic storage, and wide roof overhangs. Though small by Berner farm standards, the 150 square meters, on a single floor, with 4 rooms, living room, 2 bedrooms, and a study, were comfortably adequate for Madge and Erik. The living room and study looked across the deep valley to the waterfalls and snow-covered mountains just as Madge had seen while riding the funicular. Erik was online, doing research in the study. He came out to greet Madge. He was aware of her worries about another assignment. He hugged her. He really loved the smell of her body, and especially her hair, tousled as it was from the fresh mountain breezes. He was foolish to think about another assignment. She felt his warmth. She smelled his air and his body, and remembered, the first time, so many times, that essence of attraction had survived through decades. She was on the verge of tears. Then, crushed by fear, crushed by waves of uncertainty, she felt her tears well up, then spill down her cheeks. She backed away and erupted. "Why do you even think about going down there again? Have you forgotten the impetuousness of the clients? Have you forgotten the churlish hubris, the bad-mannered consultants, the lying contractors? Have you forgotten the food imported from thousands of miles away? Have you forgotten the poorly maintained refrigerated trucks and stores?" Erik had sensed this was coming. She continued, "Have you forgotten the fraudulent labels on packaged goods and foods? Have you forgotten pirated everything?" Then, taking her eyes from Erik, she paused and looked out over the Berner landscape. She turned and looked at him again. "And don't even try to tempt me to come with you," she continued. "I've had my fill of hole-in-the-ground toilets, standing in urine, stool marks on doors, on floors. I've had my fill of red spit city sidewalks and red spit city walls. I've had my fill of hot and sweaty 24/7 days, and my fill of air conditioning that just does not ever work right." Erik listened. "And your health? Your father started with high blood pressure medication at 40. Your grandmother took high blood pressure pills all her life. Why gamble again? Can I be any clearer? What is money? Why? Why go? Why even think about it? That place drains the life right out of you." Erik sighed, empathized. Her points were all valid. They had been retired only a bit more than a year. His health had stabilized, his aerobic condition was very good now, but the challenge of a singularly unique project had been put in front of him. It had started his fire. He never took the easy way. He took the challenge in order to succeed, and she had followed him all their life. He spoke. "How many times have I done this successfully before? It would be for no more than 6 months. We'll put a nice tidy sum away. We'll be in contact via iChat, and maybe we can dovetail a few things. Besides, Madge, I still have that fire in my belly, and this is a special project." She was still consumed by doubt and worry. He put his arms around her, kissed her on the cheek, hugged, and held her tightly, heart to heart, then suggested, "Let's talk later, okay?" She sighed and agreed. Their house became uneasily silent. Madge had dedicated over 40 years in marriage to Erik. She was old school. She was intensely independent and also in love, a love which meant damn near unconditional service to him. Erik used the income from his work to provide all the little and sometimes the very big things that brought to her everyday activities certain material pleasures, and an overall satisfying transcendental pleasure. And she, in their decades of expatriate relocations, she kept their whole house, their finances, their whole life running smoothly. Words alone cannot share the essence of the subtleties essential to the longevity of their marriage. But together they mellowed. Together they enjoyed. Together they suffered. Part 5. Erik Chalmers, Landscape Architect. Erik Chalmers, an expatriate American landscape architect, had made a specialist career as a fixer of complex, high-profile projects in difficult foreign locations where both financial and aesthetic targets were critical. Called by his colleagues simply Chalmers, he was a dedicated international professional who took seriously his technical skills and ethical responsibilities. His work was in real estate development and facilities management, most often covering design, construction, operations, and maintenance. He worked across multiple disciplines on very large projects, quite often in the Arabian Peninsula. His professional faults were few. One was that he rode the fence, that is, he worked in shades of gray. If he did his work in black and white, he could never align the diverse multicultural nuances necessary to achieve the project goals. The danger with shades of gray was, someday, someone might conclude he was on the wrong side of the fence. But the way Chalmers saw it, as a foreign consultant in the Middle East, he was always a target. His neck was always on the line. As long as he could maintain his impeccable professional ethics and technical credibility, he lived with it. It was the price of working at the highest level. A Midwesterner by birth and education, and in his early 60s, he was average in appearance, stood an average 5'10", weighed an average 175 pounds. With full head of graying hair slightly receding at the forehead, Chalmers was clean-shaven, and still looked young for his age. His family was grown. He was a grandfather. He had a tendency toward personal austerity and practical fitness. Otherwise, his presence in a group was not noteworthy. Curious about astrology, he was a water sign, which suited him well in this work. That meant he took the shape of whichever vessel in which he found himself. He worked with whichever group of people the project dictated, and he adapted accordingly. He knew his work, and he learned people. He looked at team building on these very large, complex, multicultural and multidisciplinary projects as a sort of performance art that only succeeded if the result was an elegant expression of landscape garden beauty and successfully opened on time. After Madge went to the kitchen, Erik went back to his research. Part 6. Empty Quarter. Erik's new project was in the empty quarter, the realm of the Bedouin, the Bedou, The project was specifically on the southeastern edge of the Liwa Oasis in the United Arab Emirates, the UAE. The empty quarter, Rub al-Khali in Arabic, was a huge sand desert in the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula, and the edges of the Rub al-Khali had, for millennia, been the shipping and cultural links between tropical Asia and tropical Africa. The edges of the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter, were anything but empty. Even though he had worked in the UAE before, Chalmers Googled empty quarter. The empty quarter stretched over 800,000 square kilometers, almost the entire southern half of the Arabian Peninsula. Only the empty quarter's easternmost 10% was in the UAE, and the UAE were 7 individual emirates, the largest of which was the Abu Dhabi Emirate. Deep within the Abu Dhabi Emirate was the Liwa Oasis, a long and thin, quasi-connected series of dune valleys. According to Antara bin Shaddad, the Liwa Oasis had been, since before Jahiliyyah, the coming of Islam, the only dependable source of water, and the eastern gate to the empty quarter. Antara bin Shaddad was one of 7 respected poets who have been considered primary empty quarter references. All 7 poets concur the people of this region have always been burdened with a scarcity of water and a scarcity of fertile soil. The Liwa Oasis has been the shelter for those who have survived. The empty quarter, with summer temperatures daily above 50 degrees centigrade, straddled the Tropic of Cancer. And this was the geographic context and focus for the new 5-star hospitality project that was in trouble. In his research, Chalmers uncovered some current references, some recent press articles from Abu Dhabi regarding their attempts to generate their own system of green building and developmental sustainability. A process to be known as Estidama would yield a Pearl rating system that would be applied to all projects. He hoped these new administrative layers would not be overlain on this new project. On the already tight deadline, it would be a guaranteed schedule breaker. More intriguing, however, as Chalmers found in his research, were the ancient history references, recalling past civilizations, stretching back before the beginning of written history. The empty quarter was filled with mysteries of lost, but not forgotten, cities, regions, cultures, bearing unusual names: Sheba, Dhofar, Hadramaut, Shishur, Ubar. He read about unique geographical and challenging artifact clues, stretching beyond the empty quarter, across the entire Arabian Peninsula. Examine the existing ancient buildings of Petra, of Madain Saleh, and their Nabatean culture, and one could truly thirst for what may have been buried in the eternally shifting sands, the Rimal of the Rub al-Khali. These were, at the very least, the romantic mysteries that had captured the rare Western explorers, writers like Sir Richard Francis Burton, St. John Philby, John Lewis Burckhardt, and Bertram Thomas. These brave men had all been allured to search the forbidding, the mysterious, to seek to uncover the unknown, the treasures, the fortunes, the landscapes. Obviously, access to the empty quarter had been rare, but the people, the sailors and the traders from the shores of the Indian subcontinent to the shores of East Africa knew of it because their dhows called, small port to small port, along the southern Arabian Peninsula coast, making spice route connections. But no one made it to the empty quarter interior, except the tribes, the Bedou tribes, the Rashid, the Beit Katir. Few of them ever went as far as the Liwa Oasis, and never was it recorded in written histories. In the 1950s, Wilfred Thesiger, on camels with the Bedou, crossed the empty quarter a couple times, right in the Abu Dhabi, Oman Liwa Oasis region. He wrote much about the landscape and how the Bedou read it. Knowledge in reading the landscape meant the ability to find water, and that meant survival. This was the way of life in the sands of the Rub el Khali. The coming of rain brought celebration. The coming of strangers brought fear, defense, and possible death. It was an overwhelming, a testing, a debilitating life. For security, people bred within their trusted and dependable, within their extended families. The fear, the sun, the heat, the sand, the dust, and on the coast the humidity, made life acrid. A sort of crippling languidity, leaving people only with dreams to capture the relief of a cool breeze. They lived desert life in semi-consciousness, with all bodily functions shrunk to a minimum. All human shelter materials had two common features, shade and flow-through ventilation, both to mitigate the endless environmental oppression by sun, heat, sand, dust, humidity. For months at a time, 18 hours a day and more, the ambient air temperature was well above human body temperature. Bad weather was not a thunderstorm, it was a sandstorm. This life was cursed. Yet it bred, among the best, a special strength. Madge called, "Erik, come on for dinner. The fresh charred and new potatoes have cooked up very nicely." Chalmers closed up his computer. He had sand in his shoes, and the first 5-star hotel in the empty quarter was the challenge. A singular door of opportunity beckoned him. He could not say no. He trusted Madge would understand. She always had. Part 7. Arabia Felix. Chalmers knew the Arabian Peninsula was both Felix and non-Felix. He knew it was a complex blend of cultures, a complex blur of tolerance from its coastal edges to fundamentalist protectionism in its isolated internal centers. On this empty quarter project in Abu Dhabi, he would be working through all that blur all the time. To help keep his focus, he summarized some key natural and cultural geographic features in the following series of maps. Map 1. Arabia Felix. There is no Arabia Felix without the Rub el Khali, straddling the Tropic of Cancer and known in English as the Empty Quarter. The world's largest sand desert has always been, and still is for humans, an enigma. Throughout millennia, a massive natural and cultural enigma. It is as large as the state of Texas in the United States. To the north, the Nafud and the Tana are sand-dominated deserts. In the very center of the Arabian Peninsula, there is the stone and gravel upland plains desert of the Nejd, but the sand, the dunes, everywhere, are the whispering connections to the empty quarter, the Rub el Khali. Map 2. Southwest Asia. The project was in the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, the center of a churning geopolitical region known as Southwest Asia. The focus and the pinch point of this region have always been the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf, water access to civilization nodes throughout all written history. Mesopotamia, Persia, Anatolia, and the world's oil supply. The Gulf is politically correct. It belongs to all. Or does it? The Persian Gulf belongs to Iran. The Arabian Gulf belongs to the Arabs. So in the business world, everybody starts out by calling it the Gulf region, ergo the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC. The GCC includes Kuwait, Bahrain, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, and the UAE. The GCC does not include all. Tension abounds, diplomacy rules, and duplicity is never far from diplomacy. This is where Chalmers works. Map 3. Spice Routes. The dhows still ply the waters today, albeit with diesel engines in the hold, but for millennia the edges of the Arabian Peninsula and the Empty Quarter have had point concentrations for massive flows of exotic goods on dhows that bounced along port by port, coming and going from India and further east, coming and going from Africa, but always trading along the edges of the Arabian Peninsula, the edges of the Empty Quarter. Spices, incense, and exotica. The flows, the massive flows of what? What would you find on those dhows? Frankincense, sandalwood, agarwood, amber, ivory, herbs, and opium, silks, silver, and gold, ebony and pearls, nutmeg, cinnamon, and mace, cumin, cardamom, and cloves, pepper, and vanilla. What more could you ask for? What more could be printed? Map 4. Mystique. A foreign land, a foreign culture, a foreign religion, a foreign language. What to speak of? No GPS, no telecom, no weather reports. Despite these difficulties, rare explorers from Western cultures still came, and they set for the Empty Quarter a literary tone, both alluring and mystifying. "200 years ago, in the 19th century, that is 1200 years on the Hijric calendar, individual non-Muslim Westerners began entries by a variety of stealth methods into the holy places, and wandered the endless sand deserts of the Arabian Peninsula. They sought the cultural and natural geographic heart, the source of this region. They shared their experiences by their writing. Map 5. Explorers. Johann Ludwig Burckhardt in 1810 wrote, "Tumult made Arabia an even more dangerous place." I should then have followed the example of numbers of the poor Hajis, even those of respectable families, who earn a daily subsistence on Hajj by manual labor. Sir Richard Francis Burton in 1852 wrote, "The most fantastic flights of fancy, the wildest improbabilities, the most impossible of impossibilities appear utterly natural, mere matters of everyday occurrence." Map 6. Explorers. Thomas Edward Lawrence, in 1917, in his 7 Pillars of Wisdom, wrote with sympathy, passion, and understanding of the Arab tribesmen. He lamented over the impossibility of bridging the gap between two cultures, and made a poetic tribute to the desert and its people. Harry St. John Philby, in 1920, wrote, "Waxing wanton with his horses and eunuchs and concubines in an earthly paradise, until the wrath came upon him and reduced the scene of his riotous pleasures to ashes and desolation." Map 7. Explorers. Bertram Thomas, in 1931, wrote, "He is crazed with the spell of Arabia, notorious lovers of titillating rhyme, anarchy, treachery, hospitality, devil dancing, jinns, and the cave of Suhor." The previous explorers set a literary tone for the Arabian Peninsula and for the empty quarter, but Sir Wilfrid Thesiger passed 5 years in the sands, giving his nearly contemporary insights an undeniable gravitas. He wrote, "Bin Gabaisha was certainly the best rider and the best shot, always graceful in everything he did. He had a quick smile and a gentle manner, but I already suspected he could be both reckless and ruthless, and I was not surprised when, within 2 years, he had become one of the most daring outlaws on the Trucial coast, with a half-dozen blood feuds on his hands." Map 8. UAE History. The towering red sand dunes of the Rub al Khali, the empty quarter, dominate the southern Gulf, the southeastern quadrant of the Arabian Peninsula. This hostile, sun-baked shore for centuries had been known as the Pirate Coast. Climate oppressive, agricultural environment scant. Privateers, smugglers, darted out of the hidden coves to menace all passing seafarers. Piracy and desert raiding had become the key to survival. In 1820, a British-imposed peace came to the southern Gulf when a handful of British soldiers and tribal sheikhs signed a truce in which the inhabitants of the region to be known as the Trucial Coast agreed to stop raiding and piracy. A population of about 70,000 struggled between seasonal fishing and pearling, then made summer migrations via camels to the oases of Liwa and Al Ain to barely sustain with their goats, sheep, and dates. Oil had been discovered in Abu Dhabi in the 1930s, but not until the 1960s was large-scale production established. In 1971, by the unifying strength of Sheikh Zayed from Abu Dhabi, 7 sheikdoms gained independence from Britain and federated as the United Arab Emirates. The total area of the UAE is 83,000 square kilometers, of which the Abu Dhabi Emirate has 67,000. and the Dubai Emirate has 4,000. The most recent UAE population is 8.2 million, of which Abu Dhabi has 2 million and Dubai has 2.3 million.